story. Basically, we got some snow in the mountains, and I was driving up a road, and I cut this buck track. And it wasn't a great big buck track, but it was the first snow of the season. I get excited. I just want to track deer.
Oh, yeah.
And so I get out of the truck, and I'm looking at, well, and I've found if you've got to talk yourself into taking that track, it's not the right track to take if you want to kill a really big one.
That's a good point.
But I did. I mean, like, I'll just go a little bit and see what see if I bump into him.
Yep.
Well, I didn't go, I don't know, a couple hundred yards, and that deer stood up out of bed,
That quick.
and yeah, he was right there. I videoed him. He was a basket rack. It was early season. I don't think I'm going to shoot him. So he kind of loped off out of sight. He got just out of sight, and kaboom! Someone plastered him. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. You got to be kidding me. And so anyways, I went over and talked to the guy, and he went on his way looking for the deer. And he goes, I said, I was just watching that deer. He said, well, how come you didn't shoot? I said, I don't know. I don't want my season to be over. It's too early.
Yep.
I enjoyed it too much. So I went on my way and drove out that road further, and just kind of putting around. It's like 8 a.m. and I found a track coming off this ridge, and it was a good track. It wasn't a real big hoof, but it had a big wide stagger. He had a big chest on him. So, and he was by himself, and he was just milling around. He went down into the swampland, and he was feeding, and he was just dubbing. I'm like, man, this deer, and I can hear some guys working on a snowmobile trail, like, I don't know, a quarter mile away, and he's heading right for him. I'm like, geez. Well, he had already crossed the trail, I didn't know that, but he was going up the ridge on the other side, and he kept going to these spots, and he'd get in a spot he wanted to lay down, and he'd turn around and look it over, and nope, didn't like it. And he'd go to another spot and do the same thing. He'd stop, you could see where he turned around and looked around, nope. And then all of a sudden he lined out in these woods. He was just straight line. I'm like, jeez, what's going on? So I tracked him, and he made a sharp left-hand corner, went up in the softwood, and I found a bed. And I thought I jumped him, but he was bedded right on this cliff. And I didn't jump him, and he started feeding again. And then he made a scrape. He was just, and this is a spot I was familiar with, and there's usually a couple does in there. But he was checking for them. They weren't there that year. There was no feed there. Those does weren't there. But he was feeding on mushrooms. There was some oak in there, and usually the does are in there for the acorns, but there was no acorns. And he's feeding, then he'd make a scrape. And then he'd go back to feeding, and then make another scrape. And there was another softwood knob just across this little valley. And I'm like, he's going to be right there. He's just dubbing too much. He's not out zombie walking. He's just, so I crept up that thing, and I'm calling, trying to get him to stand up and see, get curious. No, gets over it, gets on top. You see where he turned around? Nope, doesn't like it. Lines out again. Out in the hardwoods, starts marching. I pick up the pace going. There he goes, pops up out of bed, bedded in nothing. Just random, huh? He had to bed down. He'd fed so much that he kept getting sick of not finding the right spot to bed. And he just plopped down right in the middle. And I had the gun on him, and I'm waiting for him to come through that opening. Didn't happen. He ran all the way down to the road, got almost to the road, made a 90-degree turn, and went right back up where he came from. It was late in the afternoon. I'm like, what are you doing? Maybe there was someone on the road and spooked him. Like, why didn't he just cross it, Next day, he did cross the road that night. He came back down, across the road where he wanted to. And I've got an older friend that I met years ago in the woods, and he's like, he wanted to cross that road. You're going to find his track crossing that road tomorrow morning. He was right. He crossed that road. I tracked him, snow melted, lost him. Next day, went back in, drove around the roads. Well, I called my buddy again that night. I'm like, now what's he gonna, and this guy is great. He's a good guy, and he just knows deer. And he goes, well, today he's probably gonna go back up on that original ridge that you caught him coming down off of. Sure enough, there's this track going up on that ridge. and he's feeding on mushrooms, feeding. It was a snowstorm, raining. My gun was covered in ice, still muzzle over. And I'm poking up through, and I'm gonna catch him. He's here, you know. He's gonna lay down. He winded me. Took off. I gave him, I don't know, 5-10 minutes. Got on his track, and it was one of those killing days. It was raining. There was noise, and he kind of made a loop out and around through this hardwoods, and he hit some softwoods, and I'm going pretty hard on this track, and I hit that softwoods. I go, this seems about right. And I just put the brakes on. I just slowed right up, and I'm looking around, and he was standing 30 yards from me to the right behind some stuff. I never saw him. He bolts 3 bounds right in front of me broadside. I pull up the gun, my scope caps are down. Oh.
You still run those today?
I do, but I don't fold them down unless I'm going through some stuff.
Oh man, I would have thrown those things.
And it was just, all I can remember was how big of a deer it was. It was just, he had a nice rack, but he was an enormous deer. Get on his track again, and he took me up into the softwood, and he'd go out on his track, and he'd turn right around, come back on his track, and slab up the hill and wait for me. He did it like 2 or 3 times. I'm like, what's he doesn't want to go anywhere, you know, he wants to be right here. And I'm going along, he did that once, and he I don't know if I jumped him, but he's back running again. And I saw something, and probably 130 yards up through, it's kind of open softwoods, and I saw something, I'm like, jeez, is that him standing there waiting for me? And I'm looking, I put my binoculars up, no, that's not a deer. Boy, is it a deer? Is it a deer? No. Is it a moose? No. And I'm looking at him, I can't figure it out. Well, all I can see is the back half of his deer, and it looks like the hind end and a leg. And it was raining, he was real dark, you know. So I'm like, well, where's his head supposed to be? So I move the binoculars, and I see one beam sticking out around the tree. Like, his head was right behind a tree, but the antler beam was sticking out. I said, that is him. So I got steadied up on him, fired, never touched him. It was a long shot. I wasn't real good.
Yep.
He didn't like that.
Yep.
He took me for a walk then.
Yeah.
Up over the mountain, 3 or 4 miles that way, decided he was getting out of his area, made a 9-degree turn, came back. I jumped him again. I'm smoked. I've been a long ways on this deer. It's getting late. I was walking back to my truck. I saw Ray cross the road again. I'm like, all right, well, now I know it's 4 o'clock. Now I know where to pick him up tomorrow. Went back in, picked up his track. That deer, I educated him real well. I followed his track, and when he got ready to bed, he made like 4 big zigzags in front of it.
Yeah.
Like 4 times before he laid down, like 100 yards at a time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, he's smart now.
He knows.
So I tracked him down this valley, and he bedded down for the night or whatever for a while, and then he decided to go for a walk, and he lined out down this valley, and so I followed him, got way down there. He got in a mess of deer, and the snow was minimal. Lost his track. Tried circling up high. He didn't come up out of there. I don't know where he went. It was, just melted. I think the next day I took off. I was so worn out from tracking him so much for 3 days in a row. Took a day off. We got snow that night. I went back, and I started at the other end of the valley this day. I'm like, he was headed down here. He's probably still down here. And he's like 6-7 miles from where I've been hunting him, And I'm walking in, and I saw a decent buck track, and geez, I'll take this up in here and see where he goes, It wasn't him, but it was hot. That area was hot. There was a doe in heat or something. Every doe bed I came to had 3 or 4 bucks checking it from all directions.
Oh, wow.
And then these 2 bucks got together and following each other, and they were slabbing across this big range. And I'm just following them because that's the only game in town. And I'm like, I know they're not. Neither one of them are him. They don't have that big wide stance. So I'm going probably 11 o'clock. They cut another buck track that's much older. And I'm looking at it, and the sun's out. It's a south-facing hill. It's melting the snow. And I'm like, that's him. and he's heading back the other direction where I just came from, but he's up a lot higher. I'm like, well, I could stay on these fresh ones. They stepped right in his track, but that's the one I want to shoot. I'm gonna take my chances. So I get on that old track, and he's going across the side hill, and I'm losing snow again, and it's painful. Like he'd walk out of the snow, and I'm looking for pock marks in the leaves, and I'm looking ahead to see if there's more snow. Somehow I got him through all that. And there was some stretches there that I'm just guessing that this is the way he went, you know. And he had slabbed above all the doe activity. He was just scent slabbing. You know, the scent goes uphill in the morning, and he was just checking them from an elevation. He got over across there and hit a little softwood finger and 90-degree turn right out. I'm like, oh, here he is. He's going to be right here. So I poke up through there, painfully slow, poking up through, and I find his bed, and there's smoking fresh tracks walking out of his bed heading uphill. It's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Like he's heading up. Well, that doesn't make sense. He should be heading down looking for does.
Yeah.
All right, well, so I'm following him up the hill. Like, what is he doing? I didn't jump him. He just got up on his own and is heading up this hill, and it's steep. And I probably went a few hundred yards, and I cut this great big buck track in a doe. And what happened was the wind was blowing down the hill. He smelled them. So he joins in with, and they're all the same age. They're all smoking fresh. And this other big buck track is hounding this doe. Now both of them, they're zigzagging up through this thick green growth. And this doe is trying her best to lose these deer, these bucks. She doesn't want anything to do with them. And they're zigzagging, trying to cut her off. All right, well, I'm going to give it till 3:30 because I'm way back in here, and I gotta get back out, you know. 3:30 comes along. I look at my GPS. I'm like a quarter mile from the top. I'm like, all right, well, I'll just go to the top. If they pitch down over the other side, I'm out. They got almost to the top, and they turned. And just before that, one of those bucks had slabbed off, like he cut off the doe. I'm like, what is he doing? You know, that doesn't make sense. Well, what had happened is the other buck and the doe had made a circle, and he knew that, and he would just cut the corner. So anyways, I stayed with the buck and the doe and followed them up and around, and I come down into this hardwood flat just out of the softwood, and the doe, I see this great big deer pop out of its bed, and I get the gun up and where's the antlers? That was a great deer. And I'm following this great big buck track. I'm saying, if I follow this track to that bed, I'm going to be sick. So I'm humping along. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I get almost to where that doe bed is, and I look down, and there he is laying there, facing uphill, and he was downwind to her. And I think what had happened, and here I go again. I never went back and checked.
Yeah.
But I think when that other buck cut the corner,
Yeah.
this giant caught him trying to move in on his doe, and he got up and ran him off. And then he came back and bedded below that doe that was hot and just waited for her. And as soon as I saw him, I dropped down on a knee, and he stood up at the same time, and I shot him, and that was it. He didn't get out of sight. He didn't fold. I mean, he flopped around. I hit him in the neck, and he tried to take off. And I'm not afraid to shoot.
You gotta shoot.
Especially when you see a rack like that, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good buck.
So that doe, you jumped that doe out of her bed.
Yep.
And he still stayed down there below.
He wasn't inside of me when the doe popped up. Like he was over an edge.
Could he see the doe up there? You think? Then?
I don't know if he could even see her. I think he could just smell her.
So he was just hanging out.
Because the thermals, it was late in the afternoon, the thermals were coming down, and he just got downwind of her to smell her, just to keep
Keep tabs on her.
So when she got up and took off, he probably didn't know that.
Yeah.
You know?
So if he was bedded right there closer, then it would probably been a whole different story.
It could have been, yeah.
Wow.
What do you weigh?
He weighed 192.
192.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gorgeous buck.
Yeah.
Gorgeous.
And I had to, it was late in the afternoon. I was up over some ledges. I ended up having to leave him overnight, and it wasn't a good scene, but
First one you ever left overnight?
Yeah, person only.
And you're at the top of the mountain. Just
Top of the mountain.
right up in the heavy stuff.
Yep. And I kept saying, I gotta get out of here, and finally I just said, this is too hot, these tracks are too fresh.
Yeah.
Something's gonna happen, I'll walk out in the dark, I don't care, you know, I'll get out of here.
Yep.
I think I sent my girlfriend a text, it's gonna be a late one, I'm way up in here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Don't get nervous when I'm not home, because it's gonna be a while.
Yeah.
But, you know, if I hadn't have been persistent, if I hadn't have pushed it right to the end of the day, I wouldn't have got that deer.
And most people would have bailed out by then.
Yeah.
It's,
I mean, I wanted to,
yeah, your instinct though told you to keep going.
Yep.
As much as everything else was telling you not to.
when it's right, you can't turn around. You know, I'd made that mistake before when I was younger. It'll be another day.
You only get so many days. And
You only
many
get so
good
many.
days.
Yep,
And that comes with years of experience and
Yeah.
stuff. It's not something you
yeah.
pick up right away.
When it's right,
situation,
and you just
you
gotta
know.
plow forward. You have to,
Yeah.
you know?
It's a heck of a buck.
Yeah.
How many miles of drag was that up?
So,
The next
that was probably 3 miles.
Yep.
Yeah, but the first mile of it was brutal. Like,
Down through the nasty stuff.
yeah, I mean, it was just sheer drop-offs, like you couldn't just grab a hold of them and walk down, you had to drag them sideways on the mountain to get around all these ledges. And then when you drag them sideways, it was so steep that he kept getting wrapped around all the trees, you know, the little stuff. You know, it's almost near impossible to drag a deer like that sideways when all these little trees are growing, he just wants to keep sliding down the hill, you know, and you gotta pull him up and around those things, so it was brutal, but. I think I left the truck that morning to go get him at 5 a.m. and it took 3 of us till 11 to get him out. It was finally in the truck at 11 a.m.
At least you had some help though. That's big.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
You know, one guy just was picking the route because it was such a miserable place to get out of.
Yeah.
Like he just walked in front of us to make sure we weren't gonna go and end up somewhere we couldn't get back out, you know?
Yep.
So,
Jeez.
yeah.
A lot of real estate to grab onto though when you're dragging that thing.
Yeah.
How much mat, like, what was the thickest part of the beam of that thing? That thing is like almost like a moose, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with that deer is his G2s and everything are just massive.
It's
you
crazy.
know?
You don't see that.
Yeah, he was the king of the mountain for sure, you know? Yeah.
And that other buck that was with that doe, you think he peeled off?
So I think this one ran him off.
He ran him off, okay.
Yeah, and I hunted that deer the next year, I couldn't find him.
Really?
I couldn't find him, I was running, we had a little bit of snow in 2020. The first couple days, I ran all over, I couldn't find that buck.
Similar size foot to that one?
This one had a bigger like banana foot,
Yep.
the other one had a smaller hoof, but he just had that big stance.
Big
And
little chest on him.
a friend of mine ended up shooting that deer.
Oh, really?
Yep, and he shot him mid-season, he weighed 210 or 215, something like
Big
that.
old chest on
And
him.
he had a nice, he was probably 130 inch, 8-pointer, 9-pointer, something
Yep.
like that. It was a nice deer.
Yeah. That's a crazy mountain buck, man.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
You can't beat that.
yeah, that was a lifetimer right there.
Yeah,
you're
that's
gonna
a
be
good
hard
one.
pressed to beat that
Yeah.
in these hills, but they're out there though. There's
Yeah, they
something
are.
special about these mountains for sure that
Yep,
produces them.
yep.
Cool. You got anything else you want to add, or
No, it was a good one.
that was a real good one?
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this with us, John.
Yeah,
This is,
thank you.
It's great for sure, and there's a lot to learn.
Yeah, if there's any encouragement to these new hunters, you don't need to go buy 50 trail cameras. You don't need, just get out there. Just get it, the best way to learn is get out
Put the
there.
miles on.
Boots on the ground.
And, you know, there's the TV shows and stuff, they say you gotta do it like this, that, and the other. It's not true.